Yes, I was.
Can you tell us which ones?
I was assigned to District 3 and District 4.
I want to take you to the 2nd of March 2020. Can you tell me at about 5 o'clock on that day what you did?
Yes, certainly. At 5 a.m., myself and my colleague, accredited observer with AmCham as well, proceeded to District number 3 to Danamsil Nursery School, and that was where we commenced our observation for the general and regional elections.
Sure.
And after that, we proceeded to other schools and other polling stations in District number 3, and after that, we moved to District number 4.
And the polling stations which you attended in District 4 were in what areas, what sub-districts?
The polling stations were several, and they were first in district and sub-district on the east coast of Demerara, and then in South Georgetown.
And AmCham's observations about the electoral process were what? Up till the time that you went to these different districts?
Up until that time, we spent the entire day in all of those sub-districts as well as District 3. We observed that the elections was fairly conducted. The polling day employees with GCOM were professional. They were
Just a second.
certainly.
Yes, the polling day.
The elections was transparently conducted, professionally conducted, and the polling day staff were very courteous and professional in the dispensation of their responsibilities. At no point in time did any of our AmCham observers, including myself, saw anything that was suspicious or irregular.
Did you receive instructions from the head of AmCham's observer mission?
Yes, I did.
And having received those instructions, where did you go?
So the instruction that I received from the head of the observing mission, AmCham, was to proceed to Monrepo Primary School. Myself and my colleague had just completed our last polling station in South Georgetown.
Sure. And can you tell me in which sub-district is the Monrepo Primary School?
That is located on sub-district East Coast Demerara.
And what did you find when you got there?
When myself and my partner arrived at Monrepo Primary School, we saw there was a massive unrest that surrounding the primary school.
What time did you get there? Around what time?
It was around 5 p.m. on the 2nd of March, 2020.
Now tell me what you saw. What were your observations?
The school from the northern side of that school, and we could not access the school that easily because there were police barricades on the northern side as well as the southern side. There were lots of, probably hundreds of people assembled on the northern side of the school and a similar amount on the southern sides. They were very angry. They were hurling accusations and insults. It was almost like a riot taking place at both sides of the school. And it was a bit of a difficulty.
Just a second. And did you make any observations about how they appeared?
Yes. On one end, on the northern end of the school, myself and my partner saw that the persons who were assembled represented one political party, and on the southern side there were another group that represented another political party.
Having observed this, did you enter the polling station?
Yes, I did.
And at about 6 o'clock that evening, what occurred?
At 6 p.m. on the 2nd of March 2020, that was when the polling station closed and myself and my partner saw that the GCOM staff did close the polls at that point in time. There was no one in the line for the polling station that I chose to observe at that primary school. It was still orderly and peaceful, despite the unrest that was taking place outside.
And did you remain there?
Yes, I did. Excuse me, yes, I did.
And did the counting of the ballots begin?
It began about 30 minutes after the close of poll.
And because not everyone is familiar with the process, I'm going to briefly walk you through what you witnessed, okay?
Certainly.
So, can you tell me what you observed about the tallying process done at that particular polling station?
Certainly. After 30 minutes break from the voting to the start of the counting process, the PO, or the presiding officer who is responsible for that particular polling station, she explained the process of how the counting was going to take place. After that, one of her supporting staff brought the ballot box.
Pause for 1 second. So when you say the presiding officer, do you mean the presiding officer who was a GCOM employee?
That is correct.
And when she explained the process, to whom did she explain the process?
In addition to her, there were 3 other GCOM staff in the polling station. It was to party agents as well as observers who were in the room.
And were you and your colleague from AmCham the only observers there?
For that polling station, yes. For those polling stations, sorry, yes, we were.
And did any observers show up afterwards?
Yes, there was one other observer from an observant mission whose name I cannot recall.
Sure. So tell us very briefly, what was the process that the presiding officer undertook?
Certainly. At the start of the count, she explained the process that was about to take place, and then one of the GCOM staff proceeded to distribute two sets of tally sheets, one for the general count and one for the regional count. So that way, when the ballots are being counted, everyone in the room can follow and similarly make a check on each ballot that was being attributed to a political party based on where the X was placed. Thereafter, she proceeded to have the ballot box unsealed, but before doing that, she showed everyone that the ballot box was still sealed with 4 seals, and they were all perfectly intact. The seals were then broken, and the numbers called out for everyone in the room to hear. A record was made of those seals and then put in an envelope where it was eventually sealed for submission later on.
When you say sealed for submission later on, do you mean at the end of the count?
At the end of the count.
Now you're giving us a lot of details in your testimony, and I want to ask you this. Were you making notes? Were you and your colleague making notes of what was happening at the time?
Yes, we were.
And in preparing your statement, you reviewed those notes?
Yes, I did.
Thank you. So you were telling us about the seals. Will you go on to tell us what happened then? Were the contents of the ballot box emptied?
Yes, the content of the ballot box was completely emptied on the table for all to see. The presiding officer then proceeded to show the empty ballot box to everyone in the room to ascertain that there were no ballots remaining in the box. The box was placed aside, and then she proceeded to unfold the ballots because after the voters would have voted, they were required to fold the ballots in a particular way and deposit them into the ballot box. So she proceeded to unfold every single one of those ballots that were in the box. She placed them in stacks. I believe it was about maybe between 10 to 20 thereabout in various stacks for easy access to count, and then began to detach them so you can have the ballots for the general count as well as the ballots for the regional count separated and easy to count for each one of the elections that were taking place. Thereafter, she proceeded now to commence the count for the general elections.
And when she commenced the count, Who was there?
When the count started for the general elections, again, it was the same party agents that were present and myself and another observer, in addition to the GCOM staff.
Sure. Now, when she started calling out the ballots, or when she started calling out the party's name, when she looked at each ballot that had been placed in stacks, did the GCOM staff do anything?
Yes, there was another GCOM staff that was making a tally on a board for everyone to see who that particular ballot was cast for.
Right.
So it was publicly displayed, and everyone in the room can also follow that, including their own tally sheet.
And if someone had a problem seeing what was on the board or what was written on the board, what would be the reaction of the presiding officer?
She was very facilitating. So if
I didn't hear that.
she was very facilitating. So if a party agent particularly did not see a ballot, they would ask her, "Can you show that ballot again?" And she would show that ballot again.
Okay. Now, did any particular agent or observer have a difficulty with the PO's conduct of the count?
There were two party agents in that room that night, and two observers from myself and a different observer. One party agent had a problem continuously throughout the night, and that was the party agent for the APNU AFC.
And do you know her name?
Yes, her name is Onika Reese.
Now, you said she had a problem. What exactly, did she express what was the nature of her problem?
There were several problems that Ms. Reese had. One of them is that she was constantly not seeing the ballots and what was marked on the ballot for the respective parties.
Okay, so pause. Where was Ms. Reese in relation to the board where they were tallying up the votes? How far was she? Can you give us an indication?
The party agents actually were directly opposite the presiding officer, and the board was directly in front of them. The observers were on the side of the party agents, so they had better access, visibility to the ballots as well as the board.
Okay.
So, I ask you,
Certainly.
when the presiding officer was displayed, each ballot was displayed.
Each ballot was displayed.
So did he hold it up or did he move it around? So,
She held it up and then she moved it around.
oh, it's a she.
Yes,
Okay, so it was shown,
correct.
it was moved.
It was
so
moved.
that everyone in the room.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Right, so you were telling us that that particular party agent had expressed some difficulties, and you said one was that she had complained that she was not seeing.
That is correct.
She was sitting directly facing the board.
That is correct.
Where the tallies were written up. And on those occasions, when she complained that she could not see, what was the response of GCOM's presiding officer? Sure.
To what extent is this evidence relevant to our terms of reference?
Well, it's relevant, Chairman, in the context of we want to be able to show, or give an example, that the material put in on the statements of polls were done after a certain process was carried out in accordance with law, and that the numbers placed on the statements of polls were accurate.
We didn't get that from Mr. Gidding?
No, Mr. Giddings was just the IT person at,
Yeah, oh, yes.
at GCOM. Yes, and Mr. Prasad, who was our first witness, was not, he did not work for the elections. Yes, so this
So
is,
this is the first opportunity we are getting to see.
yes.
Yeah.
And the first opportunity from someone who was not working for any political party.
Okay.
And further, the drift of Ms. Rasul's evidence is speaking to proceedings that were regular
Yes,
and in compliance with the laws. In other words, her testimony so far doesn't address any irregularity in the elections day procedures.
sure. And it also shows how GCOM staff was dealing with any complaints.
Correct. Yeah.
Proceed.
Yes. So, where were we? So we had got to the first problem articulated. What was the other problem?
The other problem was that she could not recall which party received a vote maybe for one or two ballots that were already counted. So repeatedly, she would ask what was the vote cast for two ballots down.
And did the presiding officer on those occasions go back and allow her to get the correct number?
As far as was reasonable, yes.
Okay. Now, after the votes were counted, what occurred?
So after the votes were counted, they proceeded to do the summation of all the ballots or all the votes cast for each political party within that polling station.
And was this done as well in the presence of everyone in the room?
Yes, it was done in front of everyone in the room.
And when they got their totals, when GCOM got their totals, what did they do?
When GCOM got their totals, myself and the other party agents and the other observers saw that the total, everyone had the same totals basically, because we were keeping track as the count was taking place.
Sure. Did they put up their totals? Did GCOM put up its totals on the board?
Yes, because they were keeping that stroke tally on the board. The total was also placed on the board.
And were you keeping count as they counted?
Yes, I was.
And did your totals match what GCOM posted on the board?
It did.
Was there anyone there whose totals did not match what GCOM posted on the board?
Yes, it was the party agent for the APNU AFC. She said that her totals did not match.
Good. So what was the reaction of the presiding officer to this complaint that the totals were not matching?
After a few minutes of perhaps thinking it through, the presiding officer then proceeded to start the count over. So there was a recount in that polling station.
Okay. And after the recount, after the second count, did they post up the totals?
Yes, after the second count for both the general and regional elections, the totals was again posted up and the totals matched the first set of totals that were done.
And did your totals also match that figure again?
Yes, it did the second time.
And did anyone complain about the totals at that point?
Again, it was the party agent for the APNU AFC who, for the second time, said her totals did not match.
And what did the presiding officer then say?
At that point, the presiding officer said that she would no longer be doing any more recounts because two were already done and the totals were the same. Further, her reconciliation with the number of ballots issued to her, used, unused, and spoiled, had all reconciled.
Good. What was the reaction of that particular party agent?
She was very upset. She was very angry.
After the two counts had been done, what did GCOM staff do?
After the two counts were completed, GCOM's presiding officer proceeded to prepare the statement of poll and had all the persons in the room, the party agents, including the GCOM staff, to sign that statement of poll. Afterwards, all the polling day materials were put into different envelopes, which she was aware of which content goes into which envelope, and sealed to be delivered to the deputy returning officer that would come subsequently to collect those materials.
Okay. So who signed the SOPs?
The SOPs were signed by all the GCOM staff in that polling station, as well as the party agent for the PPP, but it was not signed by the party agent for the APNU AFC.
Did those party agents get copies of the SOPs?
Yes, all of them got a copy of the SOP.
And did the deputy returning officer arrive at the polling station?
Yes, he did.
And you witnessed the handover process of the ballot boxes and the other materials to him?
Yes, I did.
What did the presiding officer do in relation to the SOPs?
After the parties collected theirs and the party agents collected theirs and left, she subsequently posted the SOP on the wall for anyone who's interested to have a look at it. So it was there for public display.
So this is the wall of the polling
The wall of the polling station.
And when she posted that up for all to see, did you do anything?
Yes, I took a photograph of that SOP, of that statement of poll.
Okay, we'll come back to that a little bit later. So you stayed there from the start of the count right through to the posting of the SOP up in the polling station, correct?
That is correct.
And at about 10:35 that night, did you go anywhere?
Yes, at 10:35 p.m., I then proceeded to district number 3 to observe the tabulation process.
And at some point, did you go to district number 4?
Yes, I did. I did go to district number 4 to observe the tallying process there as well.
And where exactly did you go?
I went to the Ashman's building it was around 9 a.m. on the morning of the 4th.
Okay, did you go to Ashman's on the evening of the 2nd?
I was there just for a brief period of time before proceeding to district number 3.
Sure. Now, I'm going to ask you to have a look at the statement which you signed.
Sure.
And if you could go to page 5, paragraphs 23 and 24.
Correct.
Now don't read it aloud. Just take a quick read and then I have some questions for you.
Yes.
Thank you. So you said you went to Ashman's building and this was the office of the returning officer for District 4.
That is correct.
And when you went into the office, what did you see?
So there were lots of party agents and observers that were in the Ashman's building, and they were getting ready to do the tabulation of the SOPs, the statement of polls that are being brought to that building. And the returning officer for District 4, Mr. Claremont Mingo, was there. And he was explaining the process of how that tabulation was going to take place.
And what were the facilities within the area where the tabulation was going to take place? What facilities were there?
It was, yes, it was very accommodating. There were tables and chairs to allow for observers and even party agents to be able to carry out their work of following the tabulation process.
And were you there when the first SOP was verified and tabulated?
The first one, yes.
Can you recall whether this was at around 10 o'clock?
That is correct. It was around that time.
Now, I take it, Ms. Rasool, that after the elections, AmCham collected records from all its observers.
That is correct.
And before preparing your statement, you had a look at all of AmCham's records.
That is correct. Yes, I did.
At about, well, shortly after midnight on the 3rd of March 2020, can you recall what occurred?
In the morning hours of the 3rd of March, we had again Mr. Mingo that explained very in detail how that process was going to take place. He said that we're starting with sub-district Georgetown, and they were going to collate all of the SOPs for Georgetown, and he encouraged the parties to prepare themselves accordingly so they can follow the tabulation process in the order that he had identified.
Now, at that point in time, are you able to say whether all of the SOPs had come in?
No, all of the SOPs had not come in at that point in time.
And what was the RO's reaction to this?
Well, he did mention that, they would put together what they have, and as the SOPs were coming in, that's how they're going to collate them and then put them in order so that the tabulation process can proceed in an orderly manner and parties can follow.
Did he allow parties, I beg your pardon. Did he allow parties the opportunity to, or did he give them time for their SOPs to come in?
Yes, he did.
And when he paused the process, was it to give them time?
Yes, it was to give them time because he did identify the order, and so he wanted them to ready themselves and put their SOPs in that same order, which would allow for a smooth tabulation process. So some time was given, and I think it mentioned, he mentioned that they were going to resume the tabulation process at around 2 a.m. And that was before they actually broke for the day. They concluded for the day.
And did he say he was pausing so that, and I'm asking you about these particular words, all and sundry would be able to verify the figures called by GCOM staff?
That is correct.
When the process began at 2 a.m., did it continue until 4:30 that morning?
That is correct.
And at that point, was it halted?
That is correct. It was halted.
Do you recall 9 a.m. on the 3rd of March 2020?
Yes, I did.
Can you tell me what happened then?
Well, on the 3rd of March, at 9 a.m., colleague observers also that were present in the Ashman's building for District Number 4 proceeded to observe the tallying process. And again, it went exactly in the order that Mr. Mingo had identified the night before, or the earlier the morning before, sorry.
What was happening?
They had the SOPs were being used for the tabulation process, and parties were using their SOPs to verify that the votes that were being called out from those SOPs were in accordance with what they have. So SOPs were being used for the tabulation process.
Sure. And up till that point, were there any issues about differences between the SOPs which party agents had? Well, I would say everybody in the room had, and what GCOM was polling?
No, there weren't any major issues on that matter. Very minor issues, but not in relation to major discrepancies with tallies that were on the SOPs that Mr. Mingo had with what the party agents had.
Sure. But if, let's say, even if there was a minor issue, raised, how did Mr. Mingo react? What was his approach up to that time?
If there was a minor, it depends on the issue. So if it was an issue as it relates to something that was written on the SOP, they would revert that to the presiding officer for that particular polling station, and any other minor issue that had to do with that particular thing that was not that had nothing to do with the presiding officer's tally or what was written on the SOP, that was resolved right there and then. But those were very minor.
And is it correct to say that the tabulation and verification process with SOPs against SOPs continued until 8:32 on the night of the 3rd of March?
That is correct.
Was the returning officer at the tabulation room during the course of the day of the 3rd of March 2020?
Yes, he was.
And were there other GCOM staff members present as well during the course of the day in the tabulation room?
Yes, there were many GCOM staff, and including higher management officials in the Ashman's building.
At 8:32, when you say it ended, can you recall how many SOPs had been counted? If you can't, I'll simply ask that you be given the opportunity to look at your statement.
All right, without looking at statement, I believe it was 323 SOPs that included north and south of Georgetown.
And when you paused, when the break was taken at 8:32, did the returning officer say when the process would continue?
Yes, he mentioned that it would continue at 9 a.m. on the morning of the 4th of March 2020.
So did you return to Ashman's building at 9 a.m. on the 4th?
Yes, I did. And at the Ashman buildings in the morning, I was there for 8:30, and there were hardly anyone in the building. Subsequently, at around 9 a.m., party agents started to filter into the building and observers, and up until midday, there was no tabulation that commenced.
Did you see Mr. Mingo at 9 a.m. that morning?
No, Mr. Mingo was nowhere in sight on that morning.
Did you see any other member of GCOM staff there at 9 a.m. on the 4th of March 2020?
Yes, I did. There was the Deputy Chief Elections Officer, Ms. Roxanne Myers.
Was she there at 9?
Not precisely at 9, but sometime after 9, she was present in the building.
Sure. I'm going to ask you to look at your statement and have a look at paragraph 29, please.
Yes.
Now, in your statement, you say that you saw Ms. Roxanne Myers, the Deputy Chief Elections Officer, at 10:52 a.m. What I want to clarify is, had you seen her before that?
Yes, I did see her before that in the building, but at 10:52 a.m., that's when she came into the tabulation room to make an announcement.
And what was that announcement?
So the announcement that she made at that point in time was that the returning officer, Mr. Clarence Mingo, was not well, and as a result, the tabulation process will commence later in that day.
Now, between 9 and 10:52 a.m., did anybody from GCOM come to that tabulation room to give an explanation as to why the process was not continuing?
No. Before that time, no one came to explain anything of what was happening and why there was no tabulation taking place.
Did the staff members in the room give any explanation to the people who were there?
No. No explanation was given.
Now, at that point, did Ms. Myers make any statement about the number of persons in the room?
Yes. After she mentioned that the returning officer was unwell, she said further that they were only allowing 3 persons per political party to be in the room. At that point, there was no limit on the number of observers to be in the room because I had inquired whether that limit was extended to the observers. That limit came subsequently to 2 observers in the room. 2 observers and 3 for political parties.
Prior to that, how many observers were allowed?
Pretty much as many people that could actually fit in the room. Everyone was into the room to see what was happening. So you had more. For each mission, observant mission, I would say about between 4 to 5, sometimes 6, it depends.
So the limit was permission. Limit for observers was permission.
The limit, no, observers had free access to the tabulation room at all times. However, at that particular instance, and the same with the party agents as well. Prior to that announcement, there was unimpeded access to the tabulation room. But when that announcement came that Mr. Mingo was not well, Ms. Myers then announced a limit on the number of party agents per party in the room as well as observers per observant mission.
Yes, and it is in relation to that announcement that I'm asking you. Mm-hmm. There were a number of observer missions.
Correct.
So amongst all of these groups, there were only 2 observers allowed or 2 per mission?
2 per mission.
That's what I...
Yes.
Thank you.
May I just ask?
Sure.
Did Ms. Myers say given reason for the limit she was?
At that point, she claimed that the GCOM staff felt threatened by the number of people in the room.
Now, up till this point in time, GCOM staff had remained in the room, correct?
Yes.
And there was no verification or tabulation going on.
None whatsoever.
You were present.
Yes, I was.
Did you see or hear anyone say or do anything to threaten any member of GCOM staff?
No one said anything. In fact, the party agents were only busy trying to figure out why the tabulation wasn't starting, and observers were just simply there waiting for the process to start. But there was very little interface between party agents, observers, and GCOM staff.
So to be abundantly clear, as far as you were aware while you were there, no threats were leveled by anyone against the GCOM staff.
Absolutely none.
Thank you.
When you speak about the observers who, well, perhaps I should take you back a little bit. You said that you were an accredited observer for AmCham.
That is correct.
So did you have any form of accreditation that you wore or you had to carry with you when you went into the tabulation room?
Yes. At all times, I had on my badge that was issued to me by GCOM. It carried my name, the observant mission, and my photograph on it.
And I'm going to ask you about the other observers from the other missions. Are you able to say whether they had similar identification and accreditation on them?
Yes, all observers had on that badge that bore the same information. Sorry.
Thank you. Did you see anyone there who held himself or herself out to be an observer who was not wearing that accredited identification?
No. And further to that, all observers had their clothing that identified them to the mission that they were at. So my T-shirt had AmCham in front of it and observer at the back. And at all times, whether it was the local observers or whether it was the international observers, they were all attired in clothing that can identify them as observers.
Thank you. Now, I'm going to take you through some of the information, perhaps a little more quickly than
Sure.
before, but I want us to get the timeline correct, okay? So is it that at 11:28 you saw Duarte Hetzberger and Colin April?
Yes, I did see both of them.
At that point, they were taking the returning officer out to the ambulance.
That is correct. Both of them were with the paramedics fetching Mr. Mingo in a chair out the building.
And at 11:41, well, perhaps I should ask you this. Between 10:52 and 11:41, did anyone come back to the tabulation room to talk about the restarting of the counting, the verification process?
Apart from Ms. Myers saying that it was going to be delayed, there was none. It was only after Mr. Mingo was taken out by the ambulance, then she returned to the room and met and said publicly that the vitals for the returning officer were checked and they were okay, and he will be back in 45 minutes from the time of his departure to restart the tabulation process.
And did you make any observation at that point in time about security in that particular room?
Yes. The police security had actually heightened. And at one point, Ms. Myers asked for the room for the door for the tabulation room to be locked. So those who were in it were in it. Those who were out of it were out of it. No one was allowed into the room.
And up till that time, when the doors were locked, I ask you, did you see or hear anyone in that room threaten or say anything to GCOM staff?
Never. There was absolutely, again, no threat made to GCOM staff. There were very little interface, even at that point, between party agents, observers, and GCOM staff.
Did anyone threaten the DCO?
No. No threats were made to her.
And after 45 minutes had passed, did Mr. Mingo return?
No, not that I saw. He was nowhere in the building.
So did you see Miss Myers again?
Yes, I did.
Where was this?
She came into the tabulation room.
And at that point, what did she see?
She kept saying that the tabulation process will restart, but there was no other indication that it was, and she restated the need for the limits to be, for the party agents to be in the room and the limit for the observers to be in the room.
When she spoke about the restart of the tabulation process, did she say which sub-district they would be starting with?
So after there was no tabulation resuming, and she came back into the room to say that, there's a limit, that we want to maintain the limit, she subsequently added that we will restart the tabulation, and that this time we are going to start with sub-district East Bank, Demerara.
Can you remember around what time of the day this second interaction with Ms. Myers and the people in the room took place?
I believe it was sometime after lunch that took place, basically. My precise timing would be in the statement, but it was after lunch.
Sure. And as far as you could tell, were you also observing the conduct of the party agents in the room?
Yes.
And as far as you could tell, were they there with their SOPs?
Correct. From what I saw, it was the PPP and the smaller parties that had their huge stacks of SOPs in the room with them to follow the tabulation process.
Thank you. Now, when Ms. Myers said that they would be restarting with East Bank Demerara, can you tell me what was the reaction of the people in the room?
It was met with a vehement objection from the political parties because they were claiming that the tabulation for Georgetown remains incomplete, and it was not right for her or for GCOM to start the tabulation of another sub-district with one that is still outstanding.
Sure. I'm going to ask that your statement be shown to you again, and I'm going to ask you to look at page 6, paragraph 32, going on to page 7, paragraph 33. Now, one party's agents claimed that there were about 100 SOPs still to be verified.
That is correct. So one of the agents for the PPP indicated in her objection to that announcement of the tabulation commencing or resuming with the East Bank, said there were still 100 SOPs for Georgetown to be tabulated. But there was a lot of back and forth between Ms. Myers and those
How many
parties.
did Ms. Myers say would
She claimed
to be done?
that there were 3 SOPs for Georgetown that remained.
Okay, pause. So, during the tabulation and verification process, which Ms. Domingo had been doing from early in the morning of the 3rd, so early in the morning of the 3rd to the night of the 3rd, was Ms. Myers there? Was she participating in the process at all?
She was in the building and she was back and forth in the room, so she saw what was going on.
Good. And did she have any documentation to show why she thought there were only 3 remaining?
No, she had no evidence, no documents to show how she came up with 3 SOPs outstanding for Georgetown.
Did she give any reason for wanting to start with another sub-district?
She did not give any reason, but only said that when the returning officer comes back into the building, then the remaining SOPs for Georgetown will be tabulated.
And did you and the other Chang observer do anything at that point?
Yes, after there was a lot of back and forth between Ms. Myers and the political parties about the decision to start the East Bank when Georgetown was incompleted and the number of SOPs that were still outstanding for Georgetown, myself and my colleague ran our spreadsheet that we had on our laptop and discovered that in our records, it was 59 SOPs that were still to be tabulated for Georgetown.
And what did you do then?
So myself and my colleague publicly stated that our records show that it was 59 SOPs still to be tabulated, and we were able to provide a list of that 57 box, of those 57 boxes to be tabulated. We made the list, I took a photograph of it, and I submitted that list to Ms. Myers. In fact, the political parties also agreed for GCOM to accept our list. If there was a dispute between the two, GCOM and the parties as to what exactly is the precise number that's outstanding.
So the party agents also saw your list?
Yes, it did.
Yeah. And they agree with you on number 59.
Well, I'm not sure if they totally agree, but they were okay. Yes, but they were okay with us submitting that list to GCOM.
Thank you.
So we have a circumstance where Ms. Myers contended that there were 3
Correct.
that were outstanding, and you were able to produce a list that showed that there were 59.
That is correct.
And you handed that list to Ms. Myers, which she accepted.
Yes, I did.
Did she make a response
She said that they were going to look at it and get back to us.
to look at it?
Yes.
And did she ever look at it and get back to
No.
anyone?
No, never
As far
did.
as you were aware?
As far as I'm aware, nothing came out of that list.
Thank you.
Did the verification process resume at about 2 o'clock that afternoon?
Yes, it did resume at 2 o'clock.
And did it resume with the returning officer?
No, Mr. Mingo up to that point was still not seen in the building. there were two other junior GCOM staff that were in the room to resume the process.
Do you recall the names of any of them?
I recall the name from one of them. Her name was Alexandra Bowman. And the second one, although I can recognize her, I cannot recall her name.
Sure. Now, was GCOM staff in uniform?
Not all of them. Some of them were attired in T-shirts that said GCOM, and others were not wearing any identification for GCOM.
Okay. Did those persons not in uniform, did they have like the same sort of identification badges that you had as observers?
No, not that I saw.
So there were GCOM employees or persons who appeared to be GCOM employees who were not in uniform and had no form of identification.
That is correct.
And did those persons have access to the statements of polls?
Yes, it did.
Right. So what did Ms. Bowman and the other GCOM staff member do when they restarted the tabulation or verification process?
So it was an interesting thing that happened at 2 p.m. when the process restarted. These two GCOM staff did not have at that point any SOPs to read the numbers from. They actually had a spreadsheet in front of them, and they were going to start. They hadn't started yet, but they were about to start calling from the spreadsheet.
Pause. I want to ask you this. So they were about to start calling from a spreadsheet. Had copies of this document been distributed to agents and observers who were there for the verification process?
Up to that point, no. The observers did not have any copy, and this was the first time we were seeing this. The party agents, and when I say party agents, I will speak honestly to that it excluded the AP and UAFC. They did not have any spreadsheet, and this was the first time they were seeing that spreadsheet as well.
Sure. And you have videos and photographs of what occurred there?
Yes, I do.
Were there any objections by anyone to the use of the spreadsheet?
There were lots of objections by everyone except the AP and UAFC on the use of the spreadsheet. There were questions about this particular document and where it came from and why it was being used in the tabulation process when it was mandatory for the SOPs to be used for the verification process.
Now, did these questions only come from the party agents, or were there also questions from the observer group?
There were some questions coming from the observer groups as well, and lots of it were coming from the party agents as well.
Can you recall which of the observer groups had questions?
We had the EU would ask questions, the OAS, CARICOM, and of course a lot of the local observers as well, the Private Sector Commission, AmCham, the Guyana Bar Association also had observers in the room, and they also asked questions about it.
So with observers and party agents in the room not having copies of this document and asking questions, what was the response of GCOM staff?
So the two women were the only two at that point that were in the room, and they were not able to answer any of those questions, basically. So that was when the parties said that they need to get Mr. Lowenfield, the CEO, into that room to answer those questions.
Why do you say they were not able to answer those questions?
All the questions that were fielded to them evoked absolutely no response, and they said that they're just there to call the numbers.
I see. So did you then see at some point the CEO?
After a long time, then, and I would say a long time because from the time that the objections were made, no one saw the CEO, which you would have thought that for some a spreadsheet to be inserted into the process, you would see a higher authority from GCOM there to say something, but he was not there. The party agents literally went for him.
Now you said that throughout the process, since the process started, up till earlier that day, Ms. Myers had been in and out
Correct.
of the room. So there's this big issue now about the use of a spreadsheet. Did you see those?
No. No one was in the room when that occurred.
Sure. I want to take you to, if you could have a quick look, page 7. If you could just read paragraph 35, please. Actually, if you could read 34 and 35, that would be great.
Yes.
Thank you. Now, you told us that it was at about 2 p.m. when Ms. Bowman and the other employees said they were going to resume the process.
That is correct.
And you told us that it was a long time after that you saw Mr. Lowenfield.
That is correct.
Now, in your statement, you have at paragraph 35 that it was a few minutes after.
Yes.
Can you explain to us what you mean?
Okay, so
Clarify?
maybe I jumped the gun to talk about the latter part of it, but okay, so when that occurred and there were objections to the spreadsheet, indeed about 35 or so minutes, well, that point might have been few, but I was referring, forgive me, I was referring to the second instance when Mr. Lowenfield came. Mr. Lowenfield came into the room to answer the questions as to why the spreadsheet was being used. The party agents had gone looking for him, and then he subsequently came into the room. And when...
How did he sorry.
When you say Mr. Lowenfield came into the room to answer the questions,
Yes,
are you saying he answered the questions?
he did.
And what were his answers?
So the party agents asked questions, as I did earlier, as to why the spreadsheet, where did this document come from? And Mr. Lowenfield responded that this was an administrative document that he sees no problem in using, basically, and for expediency, it is better to use he called it a broadsheet. For expediency, it was better to use the broadsheet for the tabulation of the results.
Did he say who had prepared the spreadsheet?
There was no explanation as to how that spreadsheet was derived, and
Pause. Did anyone ask him?
yes, he was asked.
And did he answer? What did he say?
He did not answer that specific question as to where the spreadsheet came from and how he was able to come up with numbers on it.
And
But he did, if I may.
Anyone ask? Sorry.
Yeah.
Commissioner has a question.
So, Ms. Brassel, you, as I understand your evidence, you were virtually present from the beginning of this process.
Correct.
And from the beginning of this process, votes were being tabulated through the use and by reference to statements of poll.
That is correct.
So this broadsheet was a drastic change
A complete.
in the methodology.
That is correct.
And this was in relation
To the East
to
Bank,
Region 4.
to Region 4 Subdistrict East Bank, Demerara.
Did anyone ask Mr. Lowenfield for copies of the spreadsheet?
Everyone asked, the party agents asked, I asked as well. But before I tell you what his response to me was when I asked him, when he was asked about the use of the spreadsheet in the tabulation process, he justified the use of it by saying that he agreed with that and that it was for expediency purpose that they were using it. Additionally, he said that if anyone had any objections or any they saw any deviation from what was being called out from those sheets, then they will bring out the specific SOP that had a problem to check it. And then that did not sit well with anyone, and they asked for copies of the spreadsheet that was to be used. No one got it. I followed him.
When you say no one got it, when people asked, did he give a reply at all?
No, there was no response to that. He just said to continue the process.
Did anyone ask why they couldn't get a copy?
He did not. No one asked why, but I subsequently went up to the first floor, because the tabulation room was on the ground floor, And I went looking for Mr. Lowenfield to ask him for a spreadsheet. And when I saw him, it was himself, Miss Myers, his assistant Dwight Hetzberger, and a few others. They were kind of in a circle in a room on the upper floor, and I don't know what they were talking. So I waited for a while until they came out, and I asked Mr. Lowenfield if I may please have a copy of the spreadsheet. And he looked at me and dismissively says, "Don't do that to me." I don't know what that meant, but and so I realized that I wasn't going to get it, and I subsequently approached Ms. Myers and asked her for a copy of the spreadsheet. And she indicated that she will see and try to get one. But up to that point, at the end of it, never got it.
Chairman has a question.
No, I have never met Mr. Lowenfield before.
So when he told you, don't do this to me, did you say anything?
No, I didn't. I didn't even know what he meant by that, but his bodily language was very dismissive.
One question from me. You referred to the spreadsheet. It was a single sheet of paper?
Several sheets of paper.
Several sheets.
Yes.
You said you asked Miss Myers for it, and what did she say?
She indicated she will try to get me a copy.
And did you ever get a copy from her?
Never got a copy from her.
And is it correct to say that the process resumed at around 2:35 that afternoon?
That is correct. Despite the objections of the political parties and observers, Mr. Lowenfield got his way, and the spreadsheet was used to call out votes.
Well, what happened when the process resumed?
So when the process resumed with Ms. Bowman and the other female GCOM staff, they started to call the numbers that were on that spreadsheet and with votes allocated to each political party. The parties were following that with copies of their SOPs.
Could I just ask you a question? So they have these documents in their hand, the agents have their SOPs. Was the spreadsheet being put up where people could see it on a screen?
No. There was no spreadsheet for anyone to see. There was nothing of the data entry. At that point, nothing of the sort was being used. It was just a spreadsheet being called from and the parties following with their SOPs.
So, can I ask you then, the information that was being relayed from this spreadsheet or broadsheet, would that not have been the same information that was contained in the statement of poll?
At that point, there was no way to say that. The only way we would know that is when the actual numbers were being called, again, verified against someone with an actual SOP.
Let me put my question another way. The information that was being relayed from the spreadsheet ought to have been the same information contained on the statements of poll.
Ought to, if the inputting of the data on the spreadsheet did come from a source document that could be verified, and at that point, no one knew where the numbers on the spreadsheet came from.
No, that's not where my thought processes are not in that direction. Mr. Lowenfield, according to your testimony, justified the use of the spreadsheet, contending that it was for the sake of expediency.
That is correct.
So, what I'm trying to find out is that the information that was on the spreadsheet ought to have been culled from the statements of poll.
Correct.
So, would there have been anything that was not expedient about calling that information from the statement of poll?
You're correct in that, yes.
Thank you.
When the GCOM employees started calling the figures from the spreadsheet, what occurred?
myself and all the other observers, observed that the numbers were not corresponding to what the parties said was on the copies of statement of polls that they had in their possession, and we were able, the observers that is, were able to see those SOPs in the party's possession. And myself and others followed and saw that when a particular number has been called from the spreadsheet, it was not corresponding for that number for that party from that particular box.
The statements of poll that you looked at, which were in the possession of party agents, did they carry signatures?
Yes.
And can you tell us whose signatures appeared on those statements of poll?
There were the signatures of presiding officers, GCOM staff, as well as party agents, particularly for the APNU, AFC, and the PPP.
So I want to jump ahead a little bit. AmCham also collected data about the different statements of polls throughout all 10 districts, not so?
Correct, most of the districts.
And did AmCham not also do its own verification and tabulation?
We did do our verification tabulation after that because we didn't come with the SOPs. We wanted to see what were the numbers called and then match it back to the SOPs that we had in our possession. But we did do that comparative study.
After the process, you all did your own independent
That is
analysis.
correct.
So you did not have any SOP
No,
while you
at
were-
that point.
At that point in time.
Correct, we didn't have
You were
it.
looking at.
Correct,
agents.
right.
When the GCOM staff started calling out the numbers, were there any objections raised?
There were lots of objections
What was
raised.
the nature of the objection?
The parties were loudly protesting the use of the spreadsheet again by saying that something was wrong, that the numbers that are being called from the spreadsheet are not matching the numbers on the SOPs on their account. The parties were turning around and talking to the observers as well to show and further showing them that he just called a certain number for a particular party, but look what the actual number is on the SOP.
Did you look at any of the SOPs?
Yes, I did.
And was it correct to say that the numbers on the SOPs that you saw did not match the numbers being called?
That is correct. There were no matches, and even after that, when I did the comparative study, indeed, based on evidence that we had collected from that from the spreadsheet that was being called, I was able to assess it with actual SOPs in our possession. There was no match either.
Thank you.
You said that the party representatives were pointing out discrepancies
That is correct.
to GCOM officials.
Correct.
Did you know these representatives, which parties they belong to? Can you tell us?
Yes. Their agents, the party agents, were from the PPP, as well as every single small party that was represented in the room, with the exception of the APNU AFC. They had no objection to anything that was taking place.
The APNU AFC representative was not making any objection?
No,
to any of this?
they were in the room, but there were absolutely no objection coming from them. In fact, Mr. Basil Williams, who was the Attorney General at that point in time, berated the parties for even raising an objection, stating that their objections were subjective and not objective, and he saw nothing wrong with the process that GCOM was using. And that is captured on record.
Thank you.
Okay, so let me just get this right. So he was saying that figures were subjective?
That is what Mr. Williams was saying, that the objections of the parties were subjective.
Now, hang on a second. So the party agents are expressing a concern to GCOM staff about the use of the spreadsheet and the discrepancy between the numbers on the spreadsheet and the numbers on the SOPs. Is that correct?
Yes.
And a party agent for the APNU AFC is purporting to address the concerns raised.
That is correct.
Did GCOM staff address the concerns raised?
No, they did not.
Did anyone ask to see the CEO or deputy CEO at that time?
Again, yes, the party agents demanded that Mr. Lowenfield come back into the room to address these concerns.
And did he do well? When you say the party agents asked that he come back to the room, to whom did they make this request?
They were saying it to the GCOM staff that was calling out the figures.
And what did the GCOM staff say?
They did not heed those comments. They did not attempt to call the CEO, but they kept on reading those numbers from the spreadsheet. They were very dismissive of the objections and the concerns raised by the political parties.
And at 3:38 that afternoon, did you see the CEO?
Yes, he re-entered the room at that point.
What happened then?
When Mr. Lowenfield re-entered the tabulation room, the parties explained to him that the numbers that are being called from the spreadsheet were not matching the numbers that were on the statements of polls in their possession, and they wanted this to be rectified. In fact, I recalled Mr. Sais Narayan Singh, who was one of the party agents that were keeping count for the PPP, loudly stating that out of 21 boxes that were called thus far from the spreadsheet, 17 of them were not matching, where numbers were inflated for the APNU AFC and decreased for the PPP.
So what did the CEO say when the PPP agent made that assertion?
Most of the times when questions were levied to the CEO, there was a hesitant response to almost a lackluster response, and then again they told him to do a check the spreadsheet for himself so he can see what was going on.
No, but when people pointed out that there were differences between their SOPs and the numbers being called, did the CEO then go to speak to the two GCOM staff who had been calling the numbers to make any sort of inquiry of them?
Absolutely none. Mr. Lowenfield did not inquire as to what is happening, did not speak to the staff, did not seek to explain, did not show any concern that there was a deviation from what the SOPs had. He did not address that at all.
So you said that a request was made for him to check for himself.
Correct.
And did he agree to that?
He agreed somewhat a bit reluctantly, but he did pick up the broadsheet, as he called it, and then selected box number 4013, which is represented one of the polling stations on the East Bank of Demerara. That was one of the polling stations in Yarracabra Primary School.
Okay, so before we move forward, because it's a lot of data, I want to pause and ask you to look at page 9, paragraph 40.
Correct.
How many ballot boxes did the CEO call?
He did a random sampling of 3 ballot boxes.
And did you make records of any of the 3?
I was only able to get records for 2 of them, not the third one.
Sorry. And were these ballot boxes 413 and 414?
That is correct.
Is it an appropriate?
I'm thinking, Ms. Russell has been going for almost an hour and a half, so maybe we I will be break. You take a short break, just 15 minutes.
Thank you very much.